Doesn't all this death bother you?
Yeah, sometimes. I wake up every day ready to die. We all know what we signed up for.
Consequences of one's actions in the street game have the potential to reverberate far beyond expectation. In episode 2, we explored the harsh reality of great consequences. We encountered a tragic incident which ended in the death of a little girl caught in the crossfire of a violent and unforgiving world where actions carry consequences and the price of survival is often paid in blood. Letitia's demise serves as a constant reminder of the collateral damage that's inflicted on the innocent in this brutal world. This also serves as a constant reminder actions have a way of setting off a dangerous chain reaction, much like a snowball effect. A single decision can escalate, gather momentum, and impact the lives of everybody involved, which leads to violence, retaliation, and sparking a cycle of vengeance that spirals out of control. The feud between the CBI and Treason, especially Lil K's actions, means Stacey Marks will now get her task force, and Stacey Marks, she's after every big player. But the center of her investigation is, of course, the one and only Tommy Egan. The aftermath of Tommy killing Chewy was always going to cause a ripple effect. Soon on the scene was Bobby DeFranco, who knows how the streets work. He put the officer in his place for speaking out of line and told him to get familiar with the street code, because the sooner he learns, the sooner you're able to use it to your advantage. This was another great scene that adds some realism to force, and it gave us some exposure to what it's like on some of these streets. Racism is clearly a huge problem in Chicago and many places in the world, but he was quickly put in his place by Bobby DeFranco. Now, Detective DeFranco seems like he knows his way around the street, an experienced officer who was quick to get to the bottom of why Chewy was shot dead. Wayne, who was a saxophone player we saw in episode 1, had a price, and often homeless people do. He told DeFranco that the word on the street was Chewy flipped to treason, and it doesn't take a genius to work out that this was a hit from someone from the CBI. Diamond told Tommy earlier do not make a move, because it would just end up in more bloodshed and a war, with neither crew waving a white flag. This is very similar to what Ghost used to do with Tommy. He used to make moves behind Tommy's back. At the same time, I do agree and disagree with Tommy's actions. I do think disrespect from Chewy had to be dealt with, but I do think they could have handled this in another way, which doesn't result in a war between CBI and Treason. Two crews at war while law enforcement are trying to get a task force off the ground isn't good for business, and at the end of the day, they're in this game to stack paper. It's something similar to what Ghost used to say to Tommy, as Tommy acknowledged that Diamond was right, although Chewy definitely still had to pay. As the news began to filter through about Chewy's death, this was never going to be well received over at Treason, but Jenard did acknowledge this wouldn't be a move from Diamond. He knew it was Tommy who made the move on Chewy, and now it was all hands on deck. If they saw Tommy, it was eye for an eye, shoot on sight. The evening finished with Tommy finding Vic at Gloria's grave, a position that Tommy knows all too well, which would have brought back memories to Holly, Lakeisha, Ghost, and Liliana. He asks Vic why he's still fucking with his father and indirectly tells him he needs to put his father down. Ironically, something that Tommy's also done in the past when he killed his father, Tony Teresi, for betraying him. But Tommy wasn't here to be a guidance counselor to Vic. He was here to find out who was behind Liliana's death and then cancel them off the Christmas list. He knows it was someone from the Flynn organization, but despite Vic and Claudia having issues among themselves, he doesn't give up Claudia. Although one thing Vic did give up was the fact that he wasn't working for his father and he called his sister a bitch. Now, knowing how Tommy works and how he used the Mexican and Serbian beef to his advantage, I really wouldn't be surprised if he later began to use the Flynns beef to work in his favor at some point in season 2. The following morning, we pick up with Walter Flynn being presented by a business opportunity by Michael. One of his opioid batches came out too strong, so he was sitting on 10,000 of these pills with no return in sight.
I've witnessed firsthand the deleterious effect of drugs on minority communities.
I agree with you. I mean, look what opioids are doing across the country.
Look at what opioids are doing across the country. Legal drugs are killing at a higher rate than illegal drugs are. A little reference from Tariq St Patrick with how big industries have the money and power to influence lawmakers. Through campaign contributions and other form of political influence, money often leads to power and can also influence and create an environment where companies receive favorable treatment. Now, Michael didn't care about the consequences of these opioids or who Walter sold these to, as long as he got his money. More money equals more power. And at this moment in time, Walter had no choice, and regardless of where he would push these bad batch of opioids, Paulie reminded him he can't do this without the help of Claudia and Vic. Meanwhile, Claudia was making a move of her own. Getting into bed with Brendan Doyle was a business move, a classic move which we're so accustomed to Monet using in Power Book 2 Ghost, and how Tasha was able to sway Sean early in Power, playing on men's desires. But Doyle knew that already, although he still tells her if Walter doesn't start switching it up or bringing in more money, then there won't be a Flynn organization, they'll chop his head off. Continuing with the Flynn story for episode 2, we then see Walter approaching Vic to give him a chance to come back to the Flynn organization and play a lead role in the new business deal that Walter struck earlier. Walter told Vic that they were going to move their pills on the south side and take advantage of Jenard's crumbling empire. Now the Flynn organization wouldn't be in this position had Walter agreed to do business with Tommy and Diamond in season 1. Vic is someone who still doesn't agree with Walter's view and stopped him short of making yet another racist remark. Vic has always been someone who sees past segregation and beef for the benefit of paper, but in the past, all Walter did was spit in their faces. He was too stubborn, too set in his ways, and look where that's got him. Not just the crumbling Flynn organization, but also his broken relationships with Claudia and Vic. This is also where Vic starts to turn the screw on Walter by first refusing and also revealing that Claudia was behind Dahlia, making moves behind his back, something he was unaware of in season 1. As Vic refused his father's proposal, Walter had no choice but to turn to Claudia. He gives her the opportunity to run point on this deal, the opportunity that Claudia's been waiting for, but we all know Walter's first choice has and always will be Victor. He only wants Vic to take over the Flynn organization because the leader of the organization can't be a woman. This also goes back to the gender dynamic within the Flynn family and why there's such a divide amongst them. He only approached Claudia as a last resort because he needs help, until Vic sorts himself out and comes to his senses. Now he also asked Claudia to speed up the process of Vic straightening his head, but he needs time. He needs a kick up the backside, but he also needs time to grieve Gloria, because it's clear for us all to see he's heartbroken. This was someone who wanted to build a future with, someone who he made promises to.
If Dad doesn't fulfill his agreement with Dublin, everything we have will be lost, everything that's owed to us.
Claudia tells Vic that they stand to lose everything that they've built with the Flynn organization. If Walter doesn't fulfill his agreement with Dublin, then they won't only be coming for his head, they're going to take that organization. But Vic knows what games Claudia is playing, but more importantly, he knows who his father is and what he's capable of. He warns Claudia that Walter can't be trusted, but Claudia aggravates him further, pressing him right where it hurts. Vic at this moment in time is a wreck. He's constantly drunk and high because sometimes that's the only way to ease the pain. Losing a loved one can be painful, which leaves a void that seems impossible to fill. So often in times, people in grief turn to alcohol as a coping mechanism to numb their emotions and find temporary relief from the pain, which is where Vic is at this moment in time. He's extremely reckless, he commits an armed robbery at a liquor store and then finds himself being pulled over and tasered. But the Flynn family name still carries some level of weight and protection in Chicago, which also alerts Walter to the situation. He tells Vic that he needs him because he doesn't have too long left, because let's not forget he is suffering from cancer. But Vic is someone who wants to be his own man, who wants his own legacy, and he only agrees if Claudia isn't involved in the deal. Walter agrees along with cleaning up the mess he made, which is a common reoccurrence with Vic. Now the problem that Walter has created is that he initially promised for Claudia that she could run point on this deal, but all of a sudden he's ripped away her big opportunity and handed it over to Vic, who's in no position to be handling business at this moment in time. And so Claudia definitely has a right to be annoyed. Vic is a loose cannon and he's unpredictable. Now what this has also done is put a final nail in the coffin for Claudia and Walter's relationship. She knows if she's going to be the boss, then she needs to make her own move. And if we've learned one thing about Claudia, she's extremely ambitious. One way or another, she will make her move, and what all Walter has done is push her further away and maybe into the direction of their competitors. On the other side of the city, Diamond came to visit Jenard as he tries to stop his brother from retaliating, which would only end in more bloodshed. He also warned him to not start a war he has no chance in winning, and Jenard looked like a defeated man already. Nobody knows Diamond better than his brother, and nobody knew better than Jenard what his brother was capable of. The problem Jenard faced was that he told Treason it was eye for an eye, shoot on sight if they saw Tommy, but now he had to go back on his word and tell them they had to press pause on retaliating. Now I don't often agree with Jenard's way of doing business, but he was right to press pause on the Tommy hit. The gold should be stacking paper. Jenard mentioned in episode 1 that they're low on bodies and territory. He also had Merkovich taxing him for money, and he also had Miguel Garcia breathing down his neck. So the last thing he wanted was to get into a war with the CBI and Tommy, a war which he knew he couldn't win. Unfortunately, the mistake he did make later on was the way he speaks to Lil K, which makes him clap back, and we all know from then on, he was done taking orders from Jenard, but we are going to get to that in a bit more detail later on. With Diamond, his parole officer Mr. Reeves did mention that there were going to be random visits to his home, place of work, and also random drug tests. He came at a time where Diamond and Tommy were supposed to meet Miguel Garcia, and this is going to be a huge problem for Diamond. He's trying to run a drug organization while being on a tight leash, so he will have to find a way of getting Mr. Reeves off his back. Whether Diamond can use the help of the former CEO that he used to sleep with in the joint, who knows, but she's not in Diamond's story without accident either. Now, because of Mr. Reeves, Tommy had to go to Miguel Garcia on his own, which is also where we heard a familiar name. Chico mentions he knew Julio, a cool little Easter egg and a mention to a power fan favorite, and not the last we heard of Julio, but this was interrupted by a drive-by from the Serbs. In episode 1, we learn how the Serbs and the Mexicans had beef. They were direct competitors by running opposing pipelines, and so we witness a fierce shootout unfold. Tommy holds it down and helps Miguel Garcia, but this is also where he gets caught in the process. Now we'll always back our boy Tommy, but I do like what the writers have done with him getting shot. They're telling us Tommy isn't invincible, and there will be times where his life will be on the line. As he said towards the end of episode 2, he wakes up every day knowing it could be his last, but that's what he signed up for. And it really will be a sad day when Tommy Egan does meet his fate, but I think we all know he's on a similar path to that of Kanan. He'd rather die than go back to jail. He's someone who lives and dies by the street. Now, as he was getting patched up by Maria Garcia, he overhears the location of Garcia's next shipment, so just keep that in the back of your minds. Meanwhile, Chico and Garcia are having a talk about how Tommy lost his girlfriend, his friend, and his business back in New York. Someone who has nothing to lose and nothing to live for is mad dangerous to have around, and also valuable. But I also do have to disagree with this. I do think Tommy does have something to lose in Chicago. Let's not forget about one of the reasons why he stayed and decided not to go to California. JP, D-Mac, and also now Kate. So I do think Tommy does have a lot more to lose in Chicago, and him having a family of his own may even alter the way he approaches certain situations. Now, Miguel Garcia does give Tommy some valuable piece of information later on when he tells him everything in Chicago is over territory and their beef with the Serbs is no different. This is also where Julio pops up in the conversation once again, with Miguel saying he has eyes everywhere, and so I am curious to hear what else he knows, whether it be about Julio or whoever else, for example, Felipe Lobos. Now, this is where we got the introduction to Miguel's grandmother, who clearly doesn't take a liking to Tommy. She seems like a voice of reason and the head of the family and someone who Miguel looks up to. She's very focused on Tommy and calls him the White Devil, warning Miguel getting into business with him could fuck everything up that they've built, and she's not wrong. She also seems like someone who isn't afraid to tell Miguel Garcia what to do and make decisions. As he tells her about the issues that he's having with the Serbs and how he needs to strike back, she tells him he needs to set up a meeting with the cartel boss, but she reiterates, keep an eye on Tommy Egan. El Chair is the man who Miguel Garcia answers to from the cartel, who listens to Garcia's concerns around his need to strike back at the Serbs. But the reason why this meeting was necessary was because Garcia and the Serbs both get their product from El Chair, so attacking and taking out the Serbs would mean disrupting one of El Chair's biggest pipelines in Chicago, and Miguel doesn't have the capabilities to take over. He warns him, let this shit go with the Serbs, otherwise he'll have to answer to him. Also how he'll have his way with his sister if he disobeys his orders. Now Miguel Garcia seems to be terrified of El Chair, as he should be. The cartel certainly runs deep and they're not to be messed with. While Garcia was having a meeting with El Chair, Tommy and Diamond were having a meeting of their own, and this is the reason why Abileta told Miguel to keep an eye on Tommy. He's already thinking about his chess move of taking advantage of the Mexican and Serbian beef, but Diamond warned him if they were about to make a move on the Mexican supply, then their plan had to be bulletproof. The first stage of their plan was to kill some Serbians. The next step was to intercept Miguel's product, which they did manage to do after some heavy gunfire. But this is where Tommy and Diamond took advantage of the Mexican and Serbian beef. The Serbian bodies that were collected earlier on were left as if they were the ones who were behind the hit. This was also timed to perfection because it also hadn't been long since the Serbs actually came at Miguel's crew directly, so they were perfect fall guys. Although I do have to agree with Diamond, they did just like a dynamite. Tommy's looking to climb the top of the food chain in Chicago, and the move that he just made against Miguel Garcia is just the beginning. They're planning to let the Mexicans beef with the Serbs, while they quietly expand their territory, and when nobody's looking, they can slide right on in and deliver a huge network, organization, and infrastructure to the cartel to show them that they can take over for Miguel and Merkovich. Very similar to how Kanan was once able to slide in and make a deal with Jason Michich, he was planning to let Tommy and Ghost fight each other while he took care of business. This move that Tommy made also reminded me of the move he made against Vladimir's shipment in Power. He took their product and blamed the Albanians. Now with Treason, Lil K was ranting about the way Jenard stepped to him. He also mentioned that nobody wants to work for pussies, and that's why soldiers were leaving with the organization crumbling from within. But he was raging to Jenard's girl, Shanti. With Jenard himself, he promised Merkovich territory which is now occupied by the CBI, the Crimson Projects. But until Jenard could get that territory, Merkovich wanted him to fill his pockets. Now he had no choice but to pay him, but the problem he had was, this was Miguel's money, so Jenard was climbing out of one hole but just entering another. He also mentioned to Shanti Tommy and Diamond got to Cousin Buddy before he did, which was the crew in Gary that linked up with in season 1, although someone that did have his back was Shanti. She also told Jenard his crew doesn't trust him and he needs to get his shit together, otherwise his whole organization will fall. Now, later that night, Lil K makes a move to try and kill Tommy to avenge Chewy's death. He lights up Tommy's Mustang, but Tommy escapes, although someone who didn't escape was this mother's baby girl. Circling back to the beginning of this video, intertwined within episode 2 was law enforcement. Stacey Marks was fighting to get approval for a task force, but this was proven to be more difficult than she first thought, especially with her history with the CPD. She mentioned earlier that Tommy Egan could give them a straight line to the Mexican cartel. The problem Stacey had was she didn't have the backing of everybody to get the task force off the ground, but thanks to Lil K and the latest shooting, CPD will most likely cooperate with Stacey Marks to put an end to the gun violence, and this will give Stacey Marks a task force to take down Tommy Egan.